All right, so we have officially unlocked over 90 degrees at 10 in the morning. Waking up is pretty difficult. Going to sleep is pretty difficult when it is this hot. And making videos is pretty difficult, bro. The sweat is real. What's good, you guys? It's Lifestyle from lifestyledid.com. And in today's video, we're going to be going over saturation versus distortion on 808s. I'm going to be showing you pretty much which one I like and when I like to use it. But we're just going to take a simple 808, apply a bunch of different saturation and a bunch of different distortions. I'm going to kind of explain what each of them are doing, even though they're kind of relative, but the difference between the saturation and distortion. And you'll start to hear the tone difference between the two, but also the tone difference between each different type of saturation or distortion plugin. So I got a bunch pulled up. Let's just get straight into it. All right, so I got this 808 pulled up from the Versa kit right here. And I chose this one because it doesn't have too much higher harmonics on it. It's still kind of in that lower register. There isn't too much saturation or distortion applied to it when I created it. So this is a good one to start for, because this will really let us hear what happens when we get up to adding, those upper harmonics with the saturation or distortion. So let's go over real quick what saturation and distortion is very quickly. So when we're talking about saturation, there's really two that are the most common, which you'll hear about, which is tube and tape. There's a bunch of different types of saturation, but those are the two most common. So let's kind of go over what like tube saturation would be or tape saturation would be. So if we were to take tube saturation, we could talk about like a console, or we could talk about like a preamp, right? And when levels are pushed into consoles or preamps at higher levels, it kind of gives like a pleasing, warm is what they call it, like light distortion tone to it, right? It's adding upper harmonics and it's pleasing upper tones. And that's the difference between saturation and distortion. Is saturation is going to be a little bit lighter. Distortion is really going to like be destroying the sound, right? Kind of giving its name, not really, but with saturation, if we were to, for example, on a tape machine, start to push the audio into the tape machine harder, it starts to do the same thing. And tape machines work with magnetism. So you can look into all that. It's a bunch of nerdy stuff. But if you really want to, see why it happens and whatnot, you can look into that. For this video, we're not going to explain that. But just take it as on gear and consoles and preamps and like real gear, analog gear, when levels are pushed higher and we start to get into, red levels, distortion, we start to get in the digital audio world, we would call 0 dB, which is completely different in analog. Well, it's more pleasing on the analog gear. So if you have a preamp and it's like a nice preamp, like I have a Chameleon Labs in front of me, if I start to push my gain and I get into like the yellow reading and then I get into a little bit of the red reading on my preamp, it'll actually start to give it this nice saturation tone to it and kind of warm it up before it starts to sound bad. A lot of these saturation plugins are modeled after analog gear, and that's why you can get that warm tone from it, because they're modeling what happens in the analog world when you go over. Now, distortion, they say it's any deviation in a shape of an audio waveform between 2 points in a signal path. So really kind of what that means is if we have a perfect sine wave and it's moving, right, and we add some distortion to it, it's going to start to break up that signal path and give us distortion. So when we're like doing anything to where we're adding distortion to a waveform, you'll see after that the waveform won't really be perfect anymore, right? So now let's just get into it. So I have this linked into a mixer, right? Into a mixer track, and I have a bunch of different plugins pulled up, and I have an EQ at the bottom so that we could see what happens before and after all the plugins. If we have the EQ up here, we won't see because it'll be before the processing. So we have guitar rig. The reason I brought up guitar rig is because we have like 45 different distortions in here. I'm just kidding. I think it's like 10. And then we have Fruity Blood Overdrive, and then we have Fruity Fast Distortion, which are free in FL. Then I brought up Kramer by Waves, which is saturation. That's a tape, so you can see it's emulating a tape machine. And then I brought up Decapitator, and another saturation plugin. So we're kind of going to go around and see what we like. And the first thing we need to do is play the 808 and just look at what it's doing here, right? So let's just see what type of readings we get from this 808 right now. So you see the highest part, at least for me, because I'm kind of blind, that I see is the last parts I see is it's kind of registering in the 500 range. Pretty weak, right? We see we have a strong point here, and then we go up, we have, some stronger parts in the bass part of it. In the subs, it's obviously heavy. We get into the lower mids and it kind of starts to fade out, and then we get into the mid range and it's kind of becoming non-existent, right? There's still a little bit of information there, but not too much. So if we wanted it to be picked up on, let's say, an iPhone stronger or a smaller speaker, we can add saturation or distortion, and what that's actually going to do is start to give us upper harmonics even more, and it starts to accent frequencies around here. And if you go crazy, you could start to get frequencies all the way up 6K, 7K. It depends how much distortion or saturation you add to it. But if we have an 808 and this is all we have under here, right? The last part of the 808 kind of has some frequency content up to 200. And let's say I'm just throwing out numbers on a cell phone, if they had the roll off only at 300, so it can't produce anything under 300, you wouldn't really hear the 808. You might hear a little bit of it if it had a little bit around 300. But if you want it to be heard, we need to get some saturation or distortion to get those harmonic contents so that we could start to get some frequencies moving up to here. So maybe now our 808 would be occupying everything we see in here, right? So that's kind of just what I'm showing you to make it easier. Imagine we had a pure sine wave at 32 hertz, and this is all the information we had, and nothing in here. This is a big empty box. Anything that picks up audio only from, let's say, 100 to 200 hertz and above, our 808 wouldn't be heard because it's in its little own box over here, right? There's no harmonic content or frequencies that are being present in this empty box. So once we start to add saturation or distortion, maybe we can have our 808 be heard all the way up to 1300, right? And then we have all this information. So it's kind of easier to look at. That's kind of the best way to explain it, is when we add it, we start to see that more frequency occupies. So we could say this is the house, right? And when we add over, now our 808 can occupy all of this and be heard more. Hopefully that makes sense. But you could see for this 808, it'd probably still pick up on a phone, but not too much because it's kind of lacking in the low mids. So watch what happens if I literally just throw like fast distortion on it. So let's go ahead and just do that. Now we have a lot going on in this 500 range, right? And even all the way up here, we're getting up to like 5K and we're still having frequencies up there, you know, moving, and that's going to help out a lot. So now we can just kind of compare the two and see what we like. So the first thing that I'm going to say is it really depends for me what the beat calls for, because distortion is going to be more aggressive, and sometimes in a beat, distortion sounds better. It makes it stand out more. If you go listen to Nowadays by Little Skies, the 808's very distorted, but you actually don't really hear it in the context of the mix until you pay attention. If you hear that beat on its own, you'll actually hear that 808's very, very distorted. And I believe Cash Money AP used fast distortion on that 808. I think he had a stream recently where he brought the beat up. But anyways, you could see on that beat, you can hear that 808's super distorted, right? But it fits the context of the mix. So it really depends. So what I'm going to do at the end of this is play a bunch of different type of beats. But for me personally, for 808's, I kind of lean more towards either a type of distortion or decapitator. And then when it comes to like bass lines, like real bass lines or hip hop beats or something, I really like saturation, and I usually use Kramer or decapitator. I don't really reach for distortion for bass lines or smooth R&B beats. I like to have more of a warm saturation tone. So it really depends. Nothing's wrong or right. Just depends on the mix. I'll listen and I'm like, okay, do I want the 808 to really stand out, or do I just kind of want to warm it up and, you know, make it have that warm, pleasing, bigger sound? So maybe I'll reach for saturation. So let's go through a couple of these plugins and I'll just kind of show you what they do. So let's go to Guitar Rig first. Let's turn it on and let's go ahead and turn this distortion off, and I'm going to bring up my EQ and press play on the 808. So there's nothing going on, right? You can see this is how it was before. So let's go ahead and turn this on, and let's add a little bit of tone, and let's just add some distortion to it. And now let's go back. Turn it off. Turn it on. Now we're getting a lot more in the mid-range, right? Which is cool. And there's a different tone to this distortion than maybe, let's see. Let's find another one. Let's go Screamer. This one's probably going to be crazy. So let's turn this off. This is something you'd usually see on a guitar, like a stomp pedal, right? So let's see what this sounds like. Let's turn up the drive. Getting different tones. Let's go look at our EQ. Let's turn it off. Go to this one. So this one's more aggressive. It kind of would be cool for maybe like the Baby beat, right? Where we have those 808s that are kind of quick and have that like thump to them. So there's so many different things you could do just by trying distortions. And Guitar Rig's cool because we already have like like I said, like 10 distortions in here, and they already sound different. They're doing completely different tones. So you could start to get a bunch of different tones out of it. And that's why I can't really sit here and tell you which one is right for you, because there's just so many different options. So let's actually make this smaller. So, okay, so now we can see what's going on. And let's go like this. So now let's turn on the blood overdrive, and let's start to just increase the preamp and watch what happens. We're starting to get a lot more harmonic content. That mid-range is really opening up. Now it's crazy. So let's say we wanted it crazy like that, and then we wanted to kind of just blend it in. So we go over here to the wet and dry knob and just blend it in a little bit. Because we want to, okay, see, we're not seeing much here in the 500 range, right? Watch when I barely blend it. Now it's kind of accented, but we're not hearing it that much. And obviously you want to do this in the context of a mix so you can really hear what's happening. Right now we're hearing it very apparent, but in a mix, we might not start to hear the distortion until we get to like here or something, right? Because it has to break through everything else that's in the mix. But now let's go listen to some saturation. So let's go into Kramer Tape by Waves. Let's turn it on and off. On. So it's a completely different tone. It's different, right? It's softer. It's not so aggressive as the distortion. Let's go over to Decapitator and let's see what Decapitator sounds like. We have a bunch of different styles we could do. Let's go with the Neve style, and let's go ahead and just push the drive in just to see what it sounds like right off the bat. More aggressive, right? It's kind of in the middle. It sounds like saturation and distortion together. It can get really aggressive with the punish knob. It can get nasty. It starts to really break that signal up. We have different types of styles, so let's go ahead through. Let's change the Neve to a different style. And just by changing styles. Neve's aggressive. Style piece cool too. E kind of has that bounce to it, and then we could change dark or bright tone to kind of get rid of some of the high end, add some more, right? So if we're on the Neve, it's a bit of an EQ adjustment. We could do a high cut out some of the high end. Can really start to mess with it, right? So like I said, it just depends. It's all preference, really, what you want to use, distortion or saturation. It depends on the mix. But what I'm going to do next is just play a few different mixes, and they're going to be different styles of beats. And what I'm going to do is have the bass lines or the 808's be clean, and then I'm going to tell you if I added saturation or distortion to it, and then we'll go from there and kind of see what we like. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up. You guys can follow me on all social medias at LifestyleDidIt. Make sure to hit my site, lifestyledidit.com, for everything else. Other than that, subscribe to your boy, push notifications. Thanks.